You understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't think there's anything funny about it. I posted a message on Instagram on the day he was killed, sending love to his family and asking for compassion, and I meant it, and I still do. Nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. I have many friends and family members on the other side who I love and remain close to, even though we don't agree on politics at all. I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone.
Yeah, that was all a lie. He said what he said. We all saw it. And we all know why he did it. Joining me now, Jerry Dunleavy, Chief Investigative Correspondent for Just the News, one of the real great ones out there. So, Jerry, I guess we can skip past all the lying and crocodile tears and get down to, why do you think Jimmy Kimmel blamed it on the right to begin with? Did he believe it? Is he one of the dirtballs who knew he was lying? Where would he even get this idea?
Tough to get into someone's head, but what I can say for sure is that Jimmy Kimmel is likely the kind of person who was hanging out in the information space of the left. And as I laid out in a story that I did with dozens and dozens of examples of prominent leftists, this was something that a large number of prominent people on the left either fully believed or were happy to peddle to their followers. And what they were pushing was a baseless conspiracy theory that the assassin who murdered Charlie Kirk was a right-winger, and not just any right-winger, but a follower of the far-right and anti-Semitic Nick Fuentes. Now, what evidence do they have for this? None. They never did. There was never a shred or of evidence. And in fact, every piece of evidence from the very day of the shooting and onward was that this was someone motivated by left-wing ideology. We have the ammunition with inscriptions, hey fascist catch, Bella Ciao, a purportedly anti-fascist song written on some of the ammunition, and on and on. And then, of course, him admitting to his family that he had done this because he believed that Charlie Kirk was hateful, and admitting to his boyfriend who believes that he is transitioning from male to female, admitting to his boyfriend that he did this because Charlie Kirk was hateful. Now, of course, there's nothing more hateful than assassinating someone over their views. And of course, Charlie Kirk was not a particularly hateful guy at all. He went to college campuses and debated people in good faith. But this conspiracy theory, I can't emphasize enough how deep this was on the left. On Blue Sky, on Twitter, you had New York Times reporters, members of Congress, writers for The Atlantic, all sorts of people, big names and big accounts, all pushing this. Some of them, I think, deceitfully, and some of them, I think, actually believed it, because that is the, to use their, favorite terminology, that is the disinformation space that they are steeped in and that they live in.
Jerry, I'm glad you brought up the New York Times. I mean, you can look at headlines from NBC News. This is the problem with this world of make-believe these people live in. It's not just a couple tranny freaks on Reddit and Blue Sky. It's the thought of, even if you think they're biased, these huge news organizations peddle the same lies you see in the deepest, darkest corners of the internet. So if you're just a normal Democrat, you believe so many things that are simply not true.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, in one sense, obviously you blame, some people bear responsibility for believing things that aren't true. But, like I said, you had reporters and editors and contributors for The Atlantic who had bought into this totally baseless conspiracy theory that Charlie Kirk's assassin was, a far right groyper rather than what he was, a leftist who wanted to kill Charlie Kirk because he thought Charlie Kirk was the hateful one. You had writers for the New York Times, um, who had convinced themselves that it was so overwhelmingly obvious that the shooter was right wing that people on the right were going to stop talking about Charlie Kirk's assassination. They were saying this. They had clearly convinced themselves, or somehow wanted to convince their audiences, that it was so obviously true that the shooter was right wing that people on the right were going to stop talking about it. Obviously, that hasn't happened. In part because I don't think people would stop talking about it whether the shooter was from the right or the left, because lots of people just care about the truth. But people haven't stopped talking about it because it's so obvious that the shooter was motivated by left-wing ideology and a hatred for Charlie Kirk. But I mean, these are big name people from prominent places. I encourage people to read the article. It's one of the more thorough things that I've done. And when I say that there are dozens and dozens of examples, I'm not exaggerating. And I wasn't like scraping the bottom of the barrel of the internet trying to find, random people with no followers. These are prominent people, prominent left-wing influencers, and prominent left-wing reporters and think makers that were spreading this conspiracy theory. So what I'm saying is, it's no surprise that it made its way all the way to Jimmy Kimmel. Whether he was pushing a lie knowingly, or just believed it because the rest of the people that are around him believed it. It's hard to say, but this is a conspiracy theory that has taken hold on the left, and a large number of people on the left are going to believe this conspiracy theory for a long time, unfortunately.
Again, I want to remind you that he is Jerry Dunleavy with Just the News, and I actually want you to go read this article very much, because I talk to you all the time about the world of make-believe these communists live in. If you want to see the bricks in the mortar and how that world gets built, go read the article. It's fascinating. I dug into it. It's fascinating. It's the nitty-gritty detail of why your kooky liberal Aunt Peggy believes Donald Trump is a Russian agent. Anyway, Jerry, speaking of the left, the Biden administration worked very, very hard, in fact, everyone on the left, the media as well, for a very long time to brand right-wingers as domestic terrorists, up to and including lying about data. You dug into this. What'd you find?
Yeah, I mean, in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and with all of the politically motivated violence that's happening right now, a lot of it from the left, you would hope that we would have a firm, data set to get our arms around, to figure out what is going on, what's the accuracy of the threat picture in the United States, and where are domestic terrorism threats coming from. And I would want that. I want to know where the threats are coming from the right. I want to know where the threats are coming from the left. But unfortunately, the Biden administration spent 4 years muddling that picture deliberately. And one of the ways that they did it, and I know this for a fact based on declassified documents that we only now are getting our hands on, that part of how they distorted the domestic terrorism threat picture is that without telling us that they had done this, they inflated the right-wing domestic terrorism threat by counting thousands. I'm telling you, more than 1,000, probably closer to 2,000, and maybe more than 2,000 instances of arrests and cases tied to the Capitol riot of January 6th, counted those each individually as an instance of domestic terrorism, and then used that to say that right-wing domestic terrorism threat was on the rise. But they didn't tell us that they were doing that with every 6 cases. So they weren't out there saying, look, we're taking every single January 6th case that we've opened and we're counting it as right-wing domestic terrorism, and that's why we're saying that right-wing terrorism is on the rise. No, they just told us that right-wing terrorism was on the rise without telling us how they had arrived at that conclusion. And when you dig into it, you actually see that 61% of the domestic terrorism cases as of February 2022 were all directly tied to January 6th. So 61% of the domestic terrorism cases that the FBI had opened were tied to January 6th. 78% of the domestic terrorism arrests that were made in 2021 were tied to the Capitol riot. And they didn't really tell us, though, that they were using those January 6 numbers to pad the stats on this domestic terrorism threat problem. And then, of course, we saw what they did with that. They greatly expanded the power of the federal government to look into, so-called or purported domestic terrorism. They expanded the powers. Of course, like using a letter from the National School Boards Association, which called upon labeling parents as domestic terrorists to launch a DOJ investigations, and all sorts of other things that the Biden administration, the Biden DOJ did based on this sort of original sin of using the Capitol riot to pad those stats and then label right-wing domestic terrorism as this massive threat. And unfortunately now, after 4 years of the Biden administration, when we're seeing serious left-wing violence, of course, this year, seeing it with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, attacks on ICE and all of this stuff, but also seeing it the last 4 years, the last 8 years, we do not have an accurate and trustworthy data set to rely upon to determine where these threats are coming from. So the FBI currently is going to be back at square one, is going to have to go back and redo all of this because of the purposefully muddled threat picture that the Biden, DOJ, and FBI and intelligence community put together.
Jerry, before I let you go, it's more than chatter. We're hearing this from the Counterterrorism Center. Al Qaeda on the rise, plotting things. You wrote the book, amazing book about our withdrawal from Afghanistan, Kabul. Tell me what you know.
Well, Al Qaeda was never fully defeated in Afghanistan, and the Taliban never, not before 9/11, not when we were threatening to invade, not after we invaded, and not after 20 years of war, and not after we left, the Taliban never was willing to give up its alliance with Al Qaeda and to give up protecting Al Qaeda. So Al Qaeda is still a threat. It does have training and operational space in Afghanistan under the Taliban. And what's important to keep in mind about Al Qaeda is it doesn't just operate in Afghanistan. It has very effectively managed to survive and reconstitute in many ways. It is a significant challenge and threat. Iterations of Al Qaeda are a significant challenge and threat in Africa, in places like Yemen. Al Qaeda's outfit in the Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is potent. And Al Qaeda has not given up on its goal and strategy, which is big, grand terrorist attacks aimed at the West and the United States. ISIS-K is a little bit more opportunist as compared to Al Qaeda. ISIS-K will attack where it can and when it can. Al Qaeda is a bit more patient and likes the big, spectacular attacks. And it has a safe haven in Afghanistan under Taliban rule, and it's operational in Al Qaeda and in the Middle East. I think that the threat is very real, but it was very good to see Joe Kent and the National Counterterrorism Center and Tulsi Gabbard highlight this threat because I do think that it's a serious one. All of us, of course, are talking about domestic terrorism right now. I think rightly so. There's obviously some domestic terrorism threat from the right. There's a huge growing problem of it on the left. But you don't want to forget about the Islamic and jihadist terrorism threat as well around the world and here in the United States, because it's serious. Qaeda and ISIS-K are not defeated. We have killed a lot of their different leaders. We have done a lot of things to try to tamp down on them, but we lost the war in Afghanistan. There's no other way to put it. We retreated, we withdrew in chaos. The Taliban took over, and Al-Qaeda is still protected by them. So this is a challenge that we're going to continue to face.
Jerry, you are the best, my man. Come back soon. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.